Test is how do I build that body so that this idea can work through. Therefore, it becomes a little more important for you people to be able to answer the question that I started with yesterday morning. What is structural integration? We won't go into that this morning. So the second hour becomes a putting of a support under the pelvis. And it consists also of a lengthening the back in order that you can balance the trunk up over the pelvis. You see, you're still on the same trail that you were on that first hour. That first hour you started up on the trunk to get it free to the pelvis. You went down to the legs to get it free to the pelvis. Now you go down to the legs to give it foundation. You come up to the pelvis again, you go up to the trunk again, and you go up to the trunk in order to get it out of this posture and into this posture, because when the one is sitting on top of the other, there is no moment of rotation on the part of gravity to break it down. And all the rest of it are little tricks within it, you see, to make it possible to do that. The trick of how do you get that back lengthened. I remember what a time I had with Bill Schutz, who insisted on believing that you lengthen a muscle by going along it and lengthening it. But you don't. You lengthen a muscle by going across it, etc., etc. But those are tricks within this single, simple-minded notion of what you want to do with that body in order to get it balanced within the gravitational field. And those of you that remember your physics, remember that it is a question of getting the moment of rotation retired. Zero, or as near zero as you can make it. And you can only do that by getting this vertical alignment. So, now we have been talking about another trick. And the third trick is that when we work from the periphery toward the center. Now, when you come right down to it, we've been doing that in the second hour. When you go and you get to those extensor muscles in the back, you are certainly at a deeper level than you were when you were working with that superficial fascia. In the early stages of the game, nobody believes that you're really working with that superficial fascia in the first hour. But actually, as you go further along and get more familiar with it, you begin to realize that you are working with that superficial fascia, and that you are stretching that superficial fascia. And it is by virtue of the change that you put into the superficial fascia that you begin to get change in underlying structures. And over again, I have had people in the class, boys who were either MDs or osteopaths or pre-MDs and so forth, that get absolutely green when they see you going into the abdomen, as we do even in that first hour. And they're so dead sure that some one of these days they're going to go into an abdomen that way, where there's an appendix just ready to burst or something of the sort, an ovarian situation equally difficult, and that this is going to do a great deal of damage. But it won't, because the job of the superficial fascia is to keep you out if it isn't safe, and it'll do it. And the job of the superficial fascia is to distribute the energy that you add with your fingers over a wide area. And it does do it. And you won't get in specifically on an organ that is seriously deteriorated. It won't let you. Now, by the second time you come in, you'll be able to go into there, unless you've got a very sick man who's really needing a knife. And then it'll let you go in there. And then you can go in there and do something about it. And if you could look at it, you'd see the same sort of picture that you saw in Eric's ear that day. So, I'm saying to you, first hour is a superficial fascia. The second hour you're going down a little deeper, and you're getting into those extensor muscles that lie on the dorsal body. And the third hour you're beginning to look for something deeper yet, which is determining the relation of the thorax to the pelvis through the medium of the lumbar vertebra. And you come to this by a perfectly logical unwinding. This is not a revelation from on high. It's just what you do when you open the Christmas presents. Unwind the wrappings. See what each layer brings forth. And so your next layer deeper is going to have a characteristic element within it which you can use. And it is Owen. You do too. You're having too much fun listening to me.
I'm still back at the Christmas present.
I'm not going to give you any entertainment if you don't come out of it. We'll see if Fritz can haul you out of that Christmas present. What's inside the Christmas present, Fritz?
You're getting down onto the muscle layers and looking particularly for the bring up the 12th rib.
This isn't what you're looking for. This is what you have to do. You're looking for the next deeper layer, which is the quadratus lumborum. Now, does anyone want to fault me on that anatomy? Not seriously. The only thing we haven't talked too much about is the lumbar fascia. But this all comes into that third hour too. But you see, the key to the third hour is the quadratus. The key to the possible position of trunk to pelvis is the quadratus. And what determines where the quadratus is going to be?
The 12th rib.
That's why you're looking for the 12th rib. Now, is this thoroughly clear? Now, as I talk, this seems beautifully delineated and separated and differentiated and so forth. And as your hands go into those bodies, it just plain isn't so. It's a mess. It's a mixed up confusion, particularly if something has knocked the 12th rib out of place. Because if something has knocked the 12th rib out of place, you cannot get the spanning that's necessary to hold the whole outer surface of that body apart. You can't get the spanning in the lumbar fascia if it has no span there at the level of the quadratus. And if you don't have that kind of spanning, you're going to be in trouble with all your obliques, because all those obliques will have reinforced themselves to try to take the place of the quadratus, which has gone off its base. Now, another thing that happens to the quadratus is just exactly what happens to the other extensor muscles of the back. It wanders too far lateral. And part of your informational job in the third hour is to know where the quadratus should be in terms of the crest of the ilium. Now, if you look in some of your books, See here. No. What is the name of that book? One book has a beautiful picture in it, which shows the attachments of the various muscles to the crest of the ilium. No, it's not the one I was thinking of.
The one that just shows the pelvis from the top and it's colored in different places where the should be. I think it's in Lockhart here.
No.
No?
There may be one in Lockhart, but the particular picture that I had is in a Fraser. Is Lee in the house? Would you bring me the Fraser, Lee?
This is the one in the Lockhart.
Anyway, let's just show you the one in the Fraser. You can determine whether you like the one or the other better. Thank you, ma'am. There it is. Now, can any of you see this? And if not, could you come closer? Here we are, the external oblique, the internal oblique, the latissimus dorsi, iliac and transversalis fascia, transversus. And this only is the quadratus, way back here. Now, as I said, this belongs, in functional terms, it belongs with those other extensors. And consequently, if you get this moving lateral of those other extensors, this is going to go along. Here's your sacrospinalis and iliolumbar. And you see these things are all balled up in there. And when you had your fingers in there yesterday, you knew they were all balled up. And you see what this does is to make an entire block, not of wood, but of tough chewing gum, of everything that's attached here. And you have to add energy and add energy and add energy, if you want to use that particular metaphor, in order to get the differentiation between those various muscles. Now, here you have another level, and you can see where your psoas comes in. And this is going to have to be the quadratus, and here's your sacrospinalis. And you can still see, here's the transverse fascia, the internal oblique, the external oblique. It's getting a little bit simpler, but not that much. And this is the stuff that you're dealing with in the third hour. You're trying to get that ordered, you're trying to get that patterned. Now, does this clarify the picture for you? Who is still in a vast fog?
When you actually work on this, and you work right on the edge, inner edge of the rim of the pelvis. You have to be
right exactly on top.
Yeah.
And then sometimes, if you're suspicious that the iliacus is in a lot of trouble, you try to get around the corner. You see, around the corner and down into here. But this begins to present to you an understanding of the confusion that you get in these bodies and why you get a confusion. Okay, so this is the story of the third hour. And along about the time that you have the job done, you've got your third hour done. In fact, you may have to take more than that 1 hour to do it. But now look, you open your Lockharts and look at the way stuff is attached around the anterior superior iliac spine, because this is the ilium too. And you can't put pressure one place on that ilium without you get pressure other places on that ilium. They're all the same bone. These chiropractors talk about the compensations, or the osteopaths, in the body. But what I want you people to get at this moment is the reality of what is a compensation. How does it get that way? Where does it go? How does it traverse the body? This is not a mythological height on which you are flying in the wild blue. This is right a down-to-earth idea as to how strains become transmitted in a body. Yes.
Was that ticklishness and Sharon an indication there are blights that were compensating for?
Not necessarily that they were compensating. I don't know what it is. You'll get tickle in a young person, and the same thing under your, that you feel that you say this is the same thing as I had in so-and-so under your hands. But in an older person, it won't be ticklish. You rarely get ticklishness in an old person. You get tension, and it feels the same under your hand. But the young person calls it ticklishness and behaves in a pattern that we recognize as ticklishness, particularly a child. I don't know the answer. I know that sometimes it gives you a great deal of problem getting past, more often with men than with women. And one of the problems with men is that they are guarding the whole area. They are guarding it. They're unwilling to let somebody else's hand. They're unwilling to relax in order to let somebody else's hand go in. They're putting up their defenses. And sometimes, if I have to, I will take their own hand and put it there and put my hand on top of their hand and work through their hand. And of course you don't get that much done, but you get it open enough that then they eventually, but it can be an awful nuisance to you. But there's no question that ticklishness is a defense.
I remember that as I was courting women.
You were or they were?
They were.
Okay. So look at that anterior superior spine and realize that you have 5 muscles coming reasonably close together there. You have the gluteus medius, you have the iliacus, you have the tensor fasciae lata, you have the quadratus femoris. I don't think I was thinking of bacterians.
Sartorius.
Sartorius, that's right. Now, in your mind's eye, picture where the other ends of these muscles are, and realize that anything at the other end of these muscles has this end into trouble now, and this end at the anterior superior spine is now going to begin to affect what's going on at the back of the crest. And now take another look at your goal, which is to get the pelvis horizontal, and realize what can be interfering and how far it can be from the seat of the problem. And so, anything that you find practically on the lateral side of the body in the third hour is fair game. But the actual technique of the third hour is always of this thing, not of this thing. Always a stretching sideways, always a two-handed job. Maybe your hand is way back here, but it's always working. It's a stretching situation. It's a letting out so that these various muscles can have a place to work. You didn't really do an awfully good job on that superficial fascia on the side on the first hour, did you? So all of this comes in, you see. And you don't have to know all of this in your head along about the time when your hands really know it. But you better know enough about it to answer the questions that are going to be fired at you one of these days by the boys and girls up in the medical clinic. Because it's going to happen. And if they know that you know your business, it'll be all right. But if they know that you don't know your business, it's going to be that all right. So this is the story of the third hour. Now, you will be changing the position of the lumbar vertebra in that third hour, won't you? You can't help it. And if you're going to change the position of the lumbar vertebra in that third hour, you're going to change the position of the cervical vertebra. You're going to need to change the position of the cervical vertebra to balance it. And you can finish it up, again, by the pelvic lift, which organizes the bottom of the lumbars and the sacrum. You can do some organizing of the neck. In other words, remember that you are an integrator. And in your mind, have clearly in mind what has to be integrated. Basically, what has to be integrated in the body are these various segments of the spine. If the various segments of the spine are really integrated, you've got nothing else to do. So you go back and take a look at this situation and you integrate those various segments of the spine. Okay, so we have two gals, one gal.
Bob Smithers.
Bob Driver.
Yeah, Bob Driver.
Oh, Lord, yes, I forgot all about Bob Driver. All right, so let's have some coffee.
I took Chet and these two orthopedic surgeons, both very sharp guys. They had him for an hour.
He did a beautiful job.
Did he?
Just beautiful. I mean, they really grilled him about this whole thing.
Which we seek to determine are the effects of Rolfing. Hence, we would like an overall description of changes in terms of concrete, fundamental, and clearly known parameters. Certainly, it is instructive to know that evoked brain potentials change in a direction which suggests a heightened vigilance or attentional capacity. However, this is something that can be measured directly without introducing brain waves whose fundamental mode and locus of generation is still largely unknown itself. Recent evidence even suggests that the alpha wave, the so-called meditation pattern, is an artifact, and it has long been known that delta patterns can be recorded from a bowl of Jell-O dessert. One is reminded of the brainwave researcher's creed. I'll see it when I believe it. To clarify, then, the changes initiated by structural integration, we must be exceedingly careful and selective in the parameters we so choose. A simple before-after photograph has long been employed as an effective representation of the gross structural changes brought about by Rolfing. This is so because a picture, even though simple, static, and two-dimensional, is at least a representation of the man as a whole. Much more striking to the experienced eye is the changed movement of individuals as they are processed. What is it exactly that these observers see? Is it objective and can it be quantified? Does it give us a framework with which to eventually explore the physiochemical basis of these changes? I believe that there is just such a precise objective integrating notion that can be aptly applied to this problem. It is the concept of energy. In physics, long before the molecular statistical mechanical explanation, the gross properties of matter were described by the laws of thermodynamics. It is one of the most striking testimonies to the parsimony in nature that two simple mathematical formulations were able to describe most of the properties of matter and provide a framework with which to understand these phenomena on a molecular level. These laws, the first and second of thermodynamics, describe change or flow and ordering of energy respectively. Are these not the very same concepts that one intuitively invokes to describe the process of structural integration? Mainly that the person's structure has become more ordered and that he is more alive, that his energy is more flowing and that he somehow has more of it. The question now is, can these intuitive perceptions be grounded in a mathematical energy formulation which will not only describe this process but point toward a unified understanding of the underlying biophysical changes? When one thinks in terms of the energy in a biological system, what likely first comes to mind is oxygen consumption. However, when asked a priori to predict how it should be changed by processing, one is in a bit of a quandary. We might predict a decrease in basal O2 uptake because less is needed due to improved efficiency. Alternatively, one could argue that an increase in basal oxygen intake reflects the increased needs of a higher energy system, that is, a greater requirement of previously starved, undemanding tissue. For this reason, basal measurements are apt not to mean much without accompanying photothermal profiles. When the first law of thermodynamics states dE equals W minus d delta Q, where dE is the change of energy in the system, W the work done, and dQ the heat dissipated. Some of these difficulties could be circumvented by also securing estimates of maximum oxygen consumption. Procedurally, this is the trivial matter of measuring the increase in heart rate to a given submaximal workload and extrapolating nomographically to set maximum oxygen consumption. Such a measure gives us a fair estimate of the body's capacity to utilize energy and defines an upper limit on how much work the system can do. A priori, there is only one direction in which this number should go as a consequence of processing, and that is up. Let us assume that for the moment that the maximum O2 capacity does increase. There are two possible reasons for this. One is simply that due to greater static alignment of the body segments with respect to gravity, energy is freed for other purposes. Alternatively, or rather in addition, the total energy configuration of the myofascial system might be reorganized in a dynamic manner so as to facilitate the flow of energy. The definition of flow will be deferred to a following paragraph. That a body becomes more ordered in a gravitational field as a consequence of processing is undisputable. The inertial centers of the body segments can be derived from considerations of Newtonian mechanics and the total unbalanced force, torque energy, calculated. This energy can then be compared to the increased maximum oxygen consumption. If they are equal, we need look no further. If, however, the increased maximum oxygen is greater than predicted from the postural argument, we must look deeper to considerations of energy flow. Let us consider the body to be made up of an ensemble of energy-generating organs, the vector sum of which we shall call the body energy. This is a paraphrasing of a statement made by Dr. Rolf. As a simplifying approximation, let us first consider only organs directly involved in locomotory behavior, that is, the bones, muscles, and connective tissue. Specifically, we have a mechanical system of joints, articulations, energy sources, the muscles, their blood supply and innervations, springs, the elastic components of the muscle and fascia, and viscous damping forces, the inelastic components of muscle and fascial tissue. Action at a joint is then represented by a lever powered by an energy source, a motor, driving a spring, and dashpot, damping force, connected in parallel. These various module organs would be interconnected by networks of parallel combinations of elastic and damping components. Considering first action at a single joint, we see that if the viscous elements greatly outweigh the elastic ones, motion will be impeded and energy wastefully dissipated. The problem is compounded when one realizes that all of the individual energy sources are interrelated through their myofascial investments. If we examine a simple act such as walking in the light of this model, it is apparent that for maximal efficiency, these various energy sources must operate in precise, synchronous, often reciprocal patterns. If the interconnecting networks are overly viscous, then no one joint can be moved without dissipating energy throughout the entire system. If by some process the viscous elements could be changed into more elastic ones, what would the model predict? Clearly, an increased capacity for energy flow between joints is to be expected. No, that this by itself will affect an overall change toward more rhythmic, efficient energy flow is not true. If the individual elements are still unbalanced with respect to each other, then the increased capacity for energy transfer may be of little use or may even give the appearance of less synchronicity. This is so because all of the modules have their own intrinsic frequencies of oscillation, and if they are in wrong phase relationships with each other, their energies may tend to collide or interfere with one another. What then is the resolution of this problem? The various energy sources must then be modified so as to bring the system as a whole as near to a resonance condition as possible. Returning briefly to the world of structural integration, the first few sessions, mainly the first, are devoted to reworking the superficial fascia. To the practitioner, these early sessions change the resilience of the body tissue to his touch. In the later sessions, muscle groups at increasingly deeper layers are manipulated, unstuck, loosened, repositioned, etc. The end result of this process is an individual no longer torn by the force of gravity and moving with an ease of mobility he did not have before. Let us now look at this process in terms of the model. Could not the reworking of the superficial fascia correspond to reducing the viscosity of the damping elements which interconnect the arrays of energy modules? If the multitudes of energy sources were themselves operating in proper timing sequences, then this initial operation should bring the system into ordered functioning. This is clearly not the case with individuals being processed, and the model suggests that the individual energy sources, one by one, must be then adjusted so that the total complex action of these aggregates is brought into resonance. The practitioner might choose the word harmony or relationship. The word resonance in the model is a precise mathematical formulation which states that there will be sets of unique relationships between the periodicities, elasticities, and viscosities of the energy modules, such that an optimum exchange or flow of energy results if certain conditions are met. That's a beautiful definition. If this is so, it can be tested in a very simple way. Before-after motion picture photographs can be taken of subjects with markers painted at various joints as they walk. The relative motion of the joints can be analyzed by a Fourier power spectrum representation, each joint pair being considered as an energy oscillator. All of these joint pairs are intercoupled to each other with energy necessarily flowing between. If they are properly linked as a function of the relative frequencies and damping of the other components, then a minimum of energy will be dissipated in the process. The body will be then in a maximal energy configuration. Might not this correspond to what the practitioner and processor describe as being connected and no longer dragging? These measurements, along with the static torque ones, can now be compared with the oxygen uptake and thermal data. From this, we should be able to make a solid beginning toward understanding the process which begins after mechanical energy is introduced into the tissues by the practitioner. That is a magnificent paper. That is one of the best contribution that's ever been made by somebody to this work, I think.
Thank you very much. I almost didn't turn it in.
Why, you were scared of Ida?
I don't know.
Like Jan?
No.
No, I think that is absolutely beautiful. I think you should go along with the idea that you have there, and then I think it should be published. It should even be published without stills of a motion picture. Because after all, you can't publish in a journal motion picture. But this will bring this into the periphery of people who ordinarily are not in biological, not exclusively in biological fields.
Yeah, that was the reason that I was a little bit, I had hesitancies about the paper, because it didn't say anything specifically neurological or biological. And I'm sort of not used to thinking along. This is sort of a recent thing for me, too, thinking like this a little bit.
I think this is beautiful. I think this is the beginning of something that could go very far. And I think a paper like this, for instance, could be published in Science.
Okay, I'll show it to a couple. I'll go up to Berkeley this weekend and show it to a couple of the people in the departments. See if I can get some comments.
Did you get any pictures and any progression of pictures on Jerry yesterday? I noticed you had done some photographing.
We have the motion pictures. I'm going to get the motion pictures again before the 10th, or if I can get people to come the day after the 10th.
Oh, you can, because there's going to be the next. Of course, Jerry is going to be dragging. He's a week behind. But we can catch up with him.
Well,
somewhere.
I mean, the only people I have photographs of are the people in the second group. So I wanted to get them again, either before the 10th or a day after the 10th.
We'll work it out.
We'll work it out. Anyway.
I'd like to make a comment on the paper, Peter. I agree that this is really a nice crystallization of some ideas. However, putting myself in the place of somebody reading Science Magazine or whatever, the passages about the organs and resonance and stuff, I think are in danger, by the way they're worded, of being misinterpreted as being kind of black boxy, Wilhelm Reichy stuff.
The idea is to make it black box real physics, and sort of to get away. As a matter of fact, I was going to make a paragraph that this is to try to separate this kind of energy from mystical energy.
This
I
is
think
what
that would be
I
an
want
error.
to have done. I am
Heresy,
so
not-
fed up.
To continue talking in terms of organ resonance and stuff at this point, I feel is premature because I don't think there's any evidence to show it right now. It may or may not be the case. Yeah.
Oh, actually, I think there is. There was some
Yeah.
servo mechanism work done in the last 3 or 4 years on rabbit reflexes, where they use...
Then I would certainly quote that liberally.
Oh, yeah.
Well, this isn't a finished
This is
job,
just a
Don.
rough-
This isn't a finished
yeah.
job, and what
Well, I was hearing
amazes me is...
some of the stuff that the chiropractors got in trouble with in Canada,
Yeah.
and I wanted to warn about publishing something that sounds
Yeah.
like that.
Okay.
Yeah, this
I
isn't
will make
finished.
it define
Yeah.
my terms better.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
That's a good idea.
I
But-
wanted to pursue one point that you made there. I think it's a very bright collection of ideas. I think it does have some promise.
What, may I interject at this point? What utterly amazes me and pleases me so much is the fact that this man, in his 10 days worth of exposure to these ideas, can put them together in an entirely different pattern. This is what joys my heart.
But I wanted to ask you about the measuring of oxygen consumption. How did you propose in the paper to do that? I thought you were relating oxygen consumption to increased heart rate.
No, that's right. Now, look at it this way. In terms of delivering oxygen, it's got to consider which is the weakest link in the cardiopulmonary.
Well, let me just say
circulatory
that
system.
that's not a good way to measure oxygen consumption, is
No, no.
by increased heart rate.
No, not by increased heart rate. For example, now, if the person has got something wrong with their lungs, that obviously is going to be the weak link in processing oxygen. 95% of the population, the weak link in this process is the ability of the cardiovascular system to respond. Now, it turns out that if you actually measure the form in which the heart rate increases and returns to baseline after an exercise, you get within a 10% error, and this is with literally 1,000 or 2,000-3,000 subjects, you get within 10% accuracy, a prediction of the maximum oxygen consumption run by an exhaustion test, a treadmill exhaustion test. So it's really surprising. It amazed me that this was such a good measure, but apparently it is, and apparently it's well documented.
So you're talking more about the general form of the
general form.
increase and then the return
In
to
other
the
words, if a
resting
person,
pulse.
after going like this, the heart rate is up to 150, you see, they're saturated. There's no more work the system can do. Whereas if the heart rate rises slowly and returns fast, then this indicates that they have a potential for processing a lot, for transferring a lot more oxygen.
Is that what you were doing yesterday when you were taking the
Yes.
Yeah, there is definitely a correlation. The athlete has a quick return to a resting pulse that's at a nice low level. So in that case, I think that may be valid. Or you could get pulmonary function tests too, and things like that.
There's sure a lot to be done. These are just very
This is an
preliminary thoughts.
introductory, yeah.
And this was sort of just so I
Oh,
could
this is good.
see what I was thinking a little bit. Because sometimes it's a little confused in there.
The thing I like about the paper best, Peter, is the fact that it is provocative. People are going to have to think when they read this. They're going to say, "Oh yeah," I mean, they're either going to have to go along with it or attack it or something, but they can't leave it alone, and I think that's good.
Well, the thing I like best about this paper is that I'm not talking. I mean, this isn't my hash. It's something that Peter is getting in brand new.
Mm-hmm.
He's taken the ideas I've given him and he's transformed them. And this hasn't happened before. It happened within very much narrower limits. And that's what I like.
As a matter of fact,
Peter, God bless.
thank you. That's really where I like the most. If some ideas come to you people. This is the key, I think, to making quantitative boundaries, which we can say, well, if this falls in this must be so. This is where to look. Is the question of the energy measurements. I think that possibly doing some of these energy stuff with thermal photographs, with some kind of clear thermal thing, we can say how much of the energy is going to work and how much is going to heat and so forth.
Would this work that's going on up in Toronto,
in Vancouver,
help with
perfect. This crystal thermograph surface
Well,
stuff.
That's sort of the idea I had. I don't know if that's...
You get together with Rosemary by phone and find out what there is there, and then call the guy and find out. Maybe Peter could go up with you. Maybe Peter could go up with you and you could do some processing and he could do some measuring, and out of the whole thing you'd have a real contribution.
It'd be nice if we get this guy's technique down so that we could do the crystal. Wasn't it in Scientific American that article was published?
I think it was.
Does anybody
they
remember
once
which
gave some
one?
allusion to it.
I remember seeing some of those pictures holding a pair of pliers or something. Oh, it was in Life. That's right, it was in Life.
Yeah, but
At
they're all
SC
wrong
they're
about
doing
that.
it.
They're what?
At SC, USC,
They're doing it at USC?
they were doing so. And then at Maimonides, I think it's Maimonides Hospital in New York, they have the whole setup.
Do you think you could give us the name of the guy at USC that's doing it?
I'll try and find out.
Okay.
This is an old technique that I've done.
Yeah.
It's about 3 years old.
Oh, yeah.
And at least 3 years old. And
I know where I could find it.
I'm not sure, but I think Krippner up in the Maimonides is doing it, and we know him pretty well.
In New York?
Stan Crippen, yeah, he's at the Maimonides.
And he
Krippner is one of our patients.
I was going to
No,
say,
he's
really,
Oh, he'd be
He's
the
the
guy
guy
working
working
on
high.
it.
Yeah, very high.
He's been wrong.
Would one of you guys drop him a note and ask him about his
yeah,
stuff?
he's the type of guy that would, if he doesn't know,
Oh, and
he'll
he-
send you volumes of stuff back.
Yeah, and he's very friendly too.
Oh, beautiful.
He's really
Okay, that's the guy to
Maybe
work
we're
with.
really getting going.
Call him.
Miss Dixie, she said Mr. Fraser can make it in 2 days, she's asking.
Can make it. All right, the arrangement apparently is now for Friday, a week from tomorrow, and Friday, 2 weeks from tomorrow at 10 o'clock here, for those of you who want to hear this introductory material on nutrition. And any of you that want to bring any other interested people, there is no reason why we shouldn't have 3 times the number of people that are here in this room right now.
Do you want to tell Dixie anything?
Tell her just what I said. Tell her thank her very much, and I'll be talking to her later, and we will proceed on this basis. Oh, Lee, did she ask him whether we could make capes of it? If she didn't, never mind. I'll phone him by and by and thank him. And I want him to understand the level of the audience that he's addressing, you see. That he is addressing a highly professional audience, not a group of National Health Federation ladies.
Ladies are killer.
Does anybody intend to be here who can run a tape recorder? If I get it all set up, Owen? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
I'll leave one of them set up.
yeah. Now, further discussion of Peter's paper. I do think it's a very important subject for discussion at the moment, if any of you have any more ideas.
When are you going to Vancouver, Don?
Whenever we both end up in the same car headed north, I guess, probably. It's that kind of an arrangement at this point.
Okay, so we got to get back to the fact that we're doing, oh heavens, we're doing 4th hours today, aren't we? All right, so why don't we get all you 4th hour people lined up, and Owen, are you still dragging Owen, or are you out? Well, hard, since that last hour that he had when he looked so beautiful. And I think he's fallen apart not so much spontaneously as because yesterday he really worked hard, you know, one after another, after another, after another, after another. And this is what is going to happen to you until you come to a certain level of solidity. You can't do it without falling apart and without coming back to your peers to get some help. Would anybody give Owen a sheet, or does he have to go and make his own bed and lie on it?
I feel, my experience this morning is that I'm a bit more together than I was yesterday. I don't know whether the togetherness is slipping back into old structure or whether my new structure is solidifying.
Your new structure is solidifying.
Because I really feel very solid this morning.
Somehow we got to make more of a mesomorph out of you. I don't know how we're going to do it.
More potatoes and dessert.
That'll make it endomorph.
Yes, his shoulders look closest to that of anything, it seems to me, of his body. His shoulders and his upper arm are done.
Something was not good about that. It's okay for learning, but not if we were really going to do our job well. That we had to somehow understand the total being, which included his context and the whole kind of epistemological system that he's in. And that means understanding that context and how it affects him and how he affects it and that sort of thing. And about the same time, I began to be very much aware of how the environment, our setting, affected the programs that were going on there. Just the attitude of the people, what kind of staff we had, the shapes of the rooms, the way the rooms were laid out, colors, that there was interdependent relationship. And then I began to realize, too, that as we had more and more people getting connected with us that were strong, potent people, that they had difficulty sharing the same spaces, which was concerning me too. And I'm not sure that's a bad thing. It's just that they had a difficult time, and it seems to me that if we were able to create an environment that was large enough or broad enough to make it possible for these people to exist and have their own spaces, and then find ways to make contact, that this would be a nice thing. And by these people, I just mean that if we're in the business of really trying to open people to their potential, that potentially everybody can begin to move in that direction, and eventually they get to the place where they have their own vision and they want to move with it, and they don't want to have to listen to everybody else, and they want to make that happen, be real. And long range, that would be a problem. So the question was how to create environments or settings in which it would make possible for a larger number of people to explore their personal vision as they begin to open up and make that happen. So that was another thing that kind of concerned me. So kind of slowly but surely, I began to think about, and then there was a number of leaders and different people that said, gee, if we could build houses in proximity to your place, we'd rather be there. And there was a lot of people that came as participants and friends and so forth, said, gee, we'd sure rather live in proximity to this kind of environment than we would in a tract or even around a golf course or tennis courts or something. A kind of richer lifestyle to be in proximity to. So it made me begin to think about a concept to create a broader environment, broader situation in which to make all these possibilities begin to happen. And so the outcome was thinking about and talking to a lot of people and getting feedback and doing some writing and taking notes and letting that kind of evolve. And which has culminated in a lot of the ideas that are in the paper. I don't feel very good about the way it's written and the way it's presented, but I think the ideas are really good. And I feel good about the notion. I somehow feel. Another thing I begin to become aware of is that first there was Esalen, and then we came into existence, and then one center after another, after another, and after another, and all of a sudden there's a kind of, this thing's proliferating very fast. And I was very concerned about its growth and its movement and not becoming some sort of a fad, another kind of fad that would just be nothing. And it seemed to me that the only way that that would be possible was to take these processes and ground them deeper in the living process, so that the living and learning and the experiences are not really separate. In the environment that we have now, they really are separate. Because I'm beginning to see all these tendencies, because even with Esalen now, there's really an attempt for a lot of people to find ways to build, in proximity and to kind of have their own homes. This is happening, it seems to me, up here too. But yet stay, in relation to each other. So I felt kind of stuck a lot of times about how to arrange this stuff and how it would work and how we would do it and so forth. And I used to take walks on this property, and it began to kind of talk to me about how to solve some of the problems, and I feel good about that. Most of that's kind of in the paper. And then, getting down to some of the practical aspects of it. It's a fairly large piece, about 400 acres. The question is, how in the world are we going to buy 400 acres? And the guy wants about $600,000. It's a lot of money. And I thought, my God, you could buy land a lot cheaper than that someplace else. But then this question in my mind again came up. How can we create an environment which is 30 minutes from a major metropolitan area, so that if people want to go to work every day and then live in a different kind of lifestyle, that would be available to them? And that somehow, if we were to pay more, somehow work out a way to pay more for a piece of land that was closer, and that because of being close to the resources and the people and so forth, that it would make up, it would work out. Of course, this is characteristic of everything in the whole economic trend. You don't put a shopping center out where there's no people. You put it in
How
close.
far is this from a major city?
Well, it's 30 minutes from the Mission Valley, which is really considered the kind of center of San Diego. That's all moving north. Just 30 minutes, and that's with the existing roads. There's a lot of improved roads. I would imagine that it will be down to about 20 minutes within 5 or 6 years. That's not necessarily good, because 30 minutes is nothing. And it takes you, LA, if you can get home in 30 minutes.
You can get to the market in 30 minutes.
Right.
Yeah, I'll go 30 minutes now.
But it really is a kind of different world. I mean, in San Diego, you've got mostly fairly flat land, it's dry, and so forth. And here you hit this area, and it's kind of opens up, and it's green, it's pretty, it's beautiful. There's a different quality of feeling about it. And yet it's not that far away. It's a good feeling. And I'm very interested, too, in exploring the relationship between the kinds of things that are emerging out of growth centers and their relationship to the culture, and how to develop certain kinds of models, new models, alternative models that can affect the culture. That's a fascination for me. I think that may be a little ways off, but maybe not that far off. And again, I think that in order to do that successfully, you've got to have an environment in which the learning and living is really grounded, so that the dissemination and the training and everything moves out from a solid base. And so far, most of that base has been generated by Esalen. This kind of small living, learning, study community way out here has given support to all this stuff. It's run all over the country. And yet it's getting kind of shaky. I could see it collapsing. Not Esalen, but I mean the size of the thing beginning to collapse. If it doesn't find ways to really take root in living, it's just my feeling. So the practical thing was the guy wanted about $600,000, and that was an awful lot of money. And at the time, about a year and a half ago, when I was really getting into that property, it seemed more feasible because I thought we could sell a hotel. The economic situation wasn't as bad in the country, and things looked better. And the key to moving was selling the hotel.
The motel at which Kairos is now.
Right. And selling that I figured at that time I could net out somewhere between $100,000 and maybe $200,000, which would just launch us right into that, because we could come up with it down and make the improvements and so forth. But we haven't been able to sell a hotel, and then my sickness and a lot of other things, it just really complicated the situation. So the present plan is, which I think is a good plan, and something we would have probably done before, would be to go in and buy 50, 60 acres of the main piece with option on the rest. And that would include the existing structures and land and buildings.
The 60 acres that you are bidding on now includes the structures.
Right, all the structures, all the existing structures. It's about 15,000 maybe square feet. About 10,000 in the main house, and maybe another 5,000 in the other. There's about three and a half other houses, different sizes and so forth on the property.
So how many square feet of existing structures?
Probably around 15,000. So it gives us a base on which to grow from. That was another problem too, is because a lot of people said, gee, well, you can go out and buy land cheaper. But then if you have to build from scratch, especially today with the money market and the high interest rates, it's just incredible. So here's an opportunity to really pick up something and pay for it on a real long-term loan at low interest rates. We can probably get into it for about 7%, which is pretty good today. And
have you made any bids on this property?
yeah, we made an offer which was very low. It was we didn't expect him to jump at it. He made a counter offer which was very high, and we made another offer, and I haven't heard from him yet. I called my attorney as soon as I got back, and he was out of town, so I haven't heard from him. And I don't know where we are with that. But my guess is, the guy's a funny guy, and my guess is that he'll come back with a counter offer that we're still not comfortable with. but we'll get there probably. That we'll know within the next month whether we're going to get that done, and whether that piece is going to work out. And I've been kind of stubborn about it. There's been other possibilities, but I've been stubborn about that piece just because it's been inspiring to me, and because it has all the qualifications of the concept. Now, another thing that began to happen at Kairos is that over a period of 4 years, it's been obvious that certain kinds of processes have been kind of the core processes for us and established more or less the educational base for what we do. And it's not too different from what's happened at Epsilon, or I suppose it's just things that really work the best, and those are Gestalt and the good, solid, basic encounter, and bioenergetics, and structural integration, and some of the dream work and things. Those seem to be the ones that consistently the strongest in the environment. And that my feeling was is that these core processes, upon move, would break out and create their own autonomous centers to expand the base, this educational base, almost a kind of humanistic university, so that everything isn't all contained within Kairos or controlled by Kairos. My feeling is that when people get to the point where they have a vision about their work or what they're doing, that they don't want to be in that situation. I don't think it should be. I think you should create a context or a setting where that can happen, but not this kind of control. I just don't think it'll work. And so I think that it's just inevitable. So you've got to create a way in which people that begin to grow and have their own visions can begin to explore them autonomously, but interdependently with others, and begin to share and exchange. And so that became an important part. So the idea would be to come in and buy the first 60 or 70 acres. I see Kairos as kind of going in and being a primary catalyst, because we're going to, initially anyway, generate the most money to make the thing work, and most of the processes have all been connected with us. And that will provide kind of basis for it. If we can go in with Kairos and maybe 3 or 4 other centers initially, I think we'll really get off to a good start. There's already, now another area is that there's been hundreds of people that have told me they wanted to, but I'd say there's a good 15 or 20 individuals that right away would probably think about how to locate there, building homes or getting a lot and starting to build or whatever it would be, because they just want to be in proximity to this. And so that would be another thing that would kind of contribute to the economic base to get the thing off the ground. Our offer was very low down, like 30,000 down. We went up to 35, which is incredibly low. And to get in for that, I think would be good. If we could do that, it would be good. To me, that would leave. We made an offer initially of $250,000 for this 80 acres and all the buildings and so forth. The reason it's a little high, it is a little high, is it's the key piece. It's the best land. It's all the buildings. It's the key to the whole property. And he wanted a premium for it. He wanted like $350. He offered $250. So let's say that we acquired it at 35,000 down, something in that neighborhood, 40,000 down. To do their thing the way they want to do it, have the buildings paid for. And I would think that this is what the other centers ought to do, would be to determine kind of what kind of working situation they want to be in, and figure out, that the financing aspect of it. Maybe that would come out of our exploration of the money part of it too. But I don't think so. I think somehow each center they have their own group of contacts and have their own people, and it would probably be easy to do that. Initially, I think that it might be possible for the other centers to even begin in the existing structures with Kairos.
Do you have structures at Kairos? You mentioned you were planning to move certain complexes at Kairos to this property.
Yeah, I'm still not sure of what the costs involved with that. If I can move if we move the Don Quixote complex over, we could just go to work right now. And I think that it probably could generate an awful lot of income from that kind of space base. But I'm not sure what that's going to cost yet. It may be too much. Another thing that I believe is why I'm trying to do this is is really a large resource system that's been generated over the last 4 or 5 years nationally now. There's a lot of people interested and involved in these ideas and participating in one degree or another. And we really don't know what could be done with a concept that's a little larger if we call on that resource to help. I believe that we got to start kind of where we are, and the initial plans, as you look at the thing that's laid out, the program, the thing that I wrote, especially that sheet that shows the themes and the phases, you notice that basically we want to just start with moving Kairos almost as it is to another piece. That's the basic idea. And then to have those core processes split out.
Grow out of
Yeah?
Grow out of that.
Right. And so then that thing is beginning to happen. And then in relation with those people begin to live in proximity. To go that way. But I sat down with a number of people and we got to talking about how many people have been involved. There's been probably now close to 20,000 people that have actually been in the programs, just excellent Kairos. It's hard to break them out because we use the same mailing list, and I don't know. But I would still probably 7,000 of those been to Kairos, and the rest of us. And probably close to 150,000 have gone to programs all over the United States in different centers. And I don't know how many people have been influenced by the dissemination of this stuff into schools and hospitals and churches and whatever. I mean, there's just a lot of people involved. So I'm just curious to see that if we come up with a model that has some scope and it's exciting and challenging, what would happen? And I've been kind of criticized by a number of people, gee, that's ambitious, that's too big a thing. But when they look at it, all it is a total idea with the notion of a place to start, which is about what we want. It gives us a place to grow into. It's kind of dumb, I think, with that notion to think of locating on 15 acres if you really think of building a community. So you got to relocate in a situation which has the possibility of growing into something really much more. And so I really believe in this. I really, and I guess it's just because I've been so absorbed in it. I'm not willing to wipe myself out like I was before for it. And maybe I don't have my ego involved in it. It's like, yeah, that just, the sickness and everything just said, yeah, I can kill myself over this thing. But I just believe in it. I've watched how this whole notion is open and expanding nationally. I just really like to see a good, strong statement made. And so this is what we're going to try to do.
Did you say that there are already some architects and architectural group of people that have?
You'll see some of the stuff. I don't know if you saw some of the drawings that this guy did. He is just an incredible man. And I got involved with him before and asked him to do some designs for me, which were more conventional because I had to meet certain zoning requirements in Rancho, and he did something else. Just as kind of a compromising. He's more interested in really organic forms and their relationship to nature and to people. And the materials used and how to create those kinds of structures which are simple enough and the materials are simple enough that people that are unskilled can participate in that. And so that's a big part, I think, of what we want to do. I'm really excited personally about starting to work on a house for myself and create a kind of nest for my own family, but in proximity to the kinds of people and things that I love. It's important. And to be with this guy and another fellow named Jim Hubble, who've worked a lot together, is just really an inspiration. Just a really an inspiration. And he has an architectural institute, which is just a legal institute now. I mean, he's got a number of apprentices working with him, and he kind of has different things that he does, designs and has jobs and so forth. But what he wants to do is move to this property and start a full-fledged architectural institute with an apprenticeship program, and a lot of the apprentices would be working on the structures and serve as supervisors for the building.
On the property, on the side.
Right on the side, so they'd be part of this thing. And one of the things that I really feel is important is that we can't wreck the natural land, the trees and the rocks and the slope of the terrain. That's got to be part of the thing, and these guys really know how to deal with it. They just really do. And without violating it. He has worked enough in San Diego with the county and with the city, and he knows all those guys to probably get through some of the hassles that we have to do. There's a lot really supporting this kind of idea now because of the whole ecological thing. There's a lot more support for it. People are really interested in helping you create structures that don't violate nature. And there'll be more and more support for it. So I think the timing is just critical here for this.
Well, when you say autonomy, in terms of these initial institutes that would be on this property, what would be the practical form that would take? Would they own a section of the land? Would they own their structures? How do you look at this?
Well, I guess philosophically, again, if I'm thinking in terms of how we can create environments which really provide a maximum opportunity for people to make choices for themselves, then we should have a lot of possibilities. I think that if people want to own, there should be a way to do that. If they want to lease, there should be a way to do that. So that we can maximize these. A lot of people disagree with me. I have to fight with the guys. George Goodman, who's in a lot of land stuff too.
He's a land developer.
Yeah, right. He thinks so. I gotta lease it all.
Lease it all rather than allowing anyone.
But that's not necessarily bad, because if you go into 50 or 90-year leases, it's essentially the same. Mm-hmm. And people have real control over the land they're on. They can build whatever they want to build on it. The buildings will be there. So it's just the kind of form you use. And we haven't worked all the details out on that. A lot of it's going to depend on what I'm trying to do now is get into escrow and say we're in, and now all you folks that were really interested in participating in this, Kairos is going to make the move, and how about you? And that's kind of where we are with things. My personal feeling is that the way we plan to purchase, I have another corporation called Growth Settings Inc., which is not a nonprofit corporation, with the idea of purchasing the land with that. And then that corporation, which would be a development corporation, because I see long range that we're going to have to get into just the way that people develop, houses and how the whole community opens up. You got to have one group that's concerned about where the roads are going to go, what's going to go in what general areas, and how that's going to be done. You can't just have it all done helter skelter. There's going to be a sense of general
city planning.
Well, you don't want to get too much into the master planning, but you certainly, the land can talk to you an awful lot about at least where certain kinds of things can go. Certain areas just lend themselves to homes, other areas lend themselves to larger kinds of structures, institutes, those kinds of buildings or something.
Do you have any of those plans here of the structures that you have already drawn up?
I didn't bring that big tube. The only ones I have are the ones that are in the back of those two that I gave you. I didn't bring that. I just didn't. But you'll see what we've done. We have those 3 phases for Kairos, and actually the first one is the only one that's really clearly concrete. Because I don't believe you can master plan the community. You can only start with fundamental processes that will open it. We're shooting for this first phase, and the first phase really includes the existing structures plus 3 or 4 new buildings. That's what we're shooting for. And one of them is just a building designed for groups of people that would be together for longer periods, a month, 2 months, 3 months, whatever it might be. That would house maybe about 20 people at the most, probably 12 to 15, and with kitchen facilities and a big table and a big central room, and then the smaller rooms. That's on that plan too. That's one of them. The other one is just more living space and rooms for multi-purpose reasons. Another would be kind of a dormitory, less expensive thing for students. Situation also multi-purpose, because we're not sure how that's going to work out either. But those are the 3 things that we're shooting at, plus trying to get some baths set up, working that part of it.
Does this land have hot springs?
It has 7 springs, but they're not hot.
Yeah, well, when you said baths, it suddenly struck me that this would be a very nice little piece of velvet to be thrown in.
Yeah, and I've looked a little bit into that, and it's very interesting. Paddock pools in these places are all getting into creating baths now. Most of them have those whirlpool things in them, but they're, maybe 8 or 9 feet. They're about the size of those, only they're round, and they have a special filter and special heating. And whirlpool things to shoot into. And they're not that expensive, like $1,500 with a whirlpool, 4 whirlpool things shooting in. So that's not a lot of money. And it seems to me that it's getting more and more possible to building equipment for it. I don't know if you saw the design he had for the baths, but they're
That was beautiful.
Yeah. He and Jim Hubble, I don't have his film when I was here, but he built a pool, swimming pool for a person. And it was just all sculptured kind of down the side of the hill, this wild slide all done in time, you know, going down the hill and then with sculptures going up and it drops down into the pool. It was just, they just really have a feeling for doing that kind of stuff.
And I've seen some of their work. They really do beautiful things.
Yeah.
They seem to have had some contact with Solari.
Yeah, a little.
Yeah.
Ken sees him as one of his only major competitors.
Mm-hmm.
That's how he sees him. Wright is the other one.
Mm-hmm.
He really loves Wright. Wright is kind of just, he's kind of his guru, you know, just has all his books and all his records. Very much kind of the same way. Hard-headed character. Beautiful and gentle, too. I feel a little more comfortable in asking me questions. Maybe I ought to show the slides.
I'd like to just make a comment, Bob. I really admire the sophistication that you're using in going at this thing. I really dig it.
Thank you. I've been under some attack.
No, I think you're right on. You know,
I think it's
there's
time.
no shit. It's just straight in. It's great.
I think it's time. And, you know, I saw this thing. I spent a lot of time trying to watch the whole phenomenon. And not too many people are doing that for some reason. It's funny, you know, Abe was doing some writing on it. But I spent a lot of time, and there's a big conflict between these people that say the most important thing is somehow to move in service of self. That's what you got to do and develop that. And other people are saying, no, you got to move what's emerging out in service of the world. And then these people start fighting with each other. It's just, I mean, it's incredible. And of course, they need each other badly. They support each other for a number of different reasons. And the split even happened geographically with Esalen. You know, one group went to San Francisco and the other stayed here. And the thing is that if we don't begin to create relational structures that connect the two, that provide people when they're a certain place to move into one world and then to the other in this kind of pulsatory way, you know, then you get trapped and you get bitter and you get mean and you get the wrong way. And so you have to start seeing in these kinds of terms. I think it's very important. And maybe it's going to begin to happen, but I began to find that it got better for me when I started looking at them and making it explicit that that's what I was seeing. And damn it, we got to do something about it. It just won't somehow happen. But we've got to think a little bit about the design involved. And like I say, that when this thing really gets a little more stabilized too, the idea of exploring different kinds of models really exciting to me. I can see this happening on that property because it's only 30 minutes from downtown. I'd love to see you kind of experiment with those kids that are getting thrown out of their homes and schools don't want them. Jesus, is getting terrible. Nobody knows what to do. And here we have an incredible, very rich input system and just kind of flowing in and out of Esalen and Kairos and people and talents and methodologies and energy that nobody else has. You know, you get these psychologists, they go out and they write up these great paper tigers, and then they wonder why it collapses, and they haven't got the stuff to hold it up.
We have all the modalities necessary to get to those kids. It's a way of getting to them. I mean, it's getting connected with them that's lacking, right?
And now, I mean, for the first time, there's a kind of base that can give this support. You know. And my concern is that we got to keep broadening and deepening this base along with creating these models, and they got to go together. And there's a flowing back and forth. And but there's no end to that. There's a whole one of the things happening in our culture because of the change is the whole idea of transition and people in transition, marital transition, occupational transition, lifestyle transition. How to create environments within urban cultures that help people through those transitions rather than make it a little easier for them. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of really exciting notions, possibilities that could be explored, and even in resident programs, they ought to begin to move some of them with some applied interests. So when people come out the other end, they come out with a place to go. You know, they not only have created a new kind of person inside that feels different, but you create those structures in the culture that give them support when they go back in. That's got to be thought about.
Have you ever heard of the American Indian concept of the rite of passage?
Yeah.
That's kind of what I hear you saying.
Yeah.
It's really beautiful.
Right. And this has been a real concern of mine. How do you build this kind of bridge?
Yeah.
And we're doing it now in a number of ways. We started a project called Next Step. I don't want to get into all that, but Next Step is we sent questionnaires out to 5,000 people in LA and San Diego and asked them, essentially, that had been to our programs and excellence programs, just asked them, did any changes occur in your life as a result of these experiences? And if so, were you able to make those changes last in your life? In other words, if you were to get a vision, were you able to make that vision real? If you got stuck, tell us where you got stuck so we can begin to design around those stuck places and help through that, whether it was in your home, in your business, or whatever. Give us a sense of that. And on the other hand, if you were able to make it and move well with it, how did you do that? Because we want to learn. And so we would use that data as a basis for a new kind of program, which I think is going to be very different than what we're doing now. Very different. Betty Brazan is handling that project in LA for us. One of the problems is that it's just, you need the money. These things should be done. So, I won't get into too much, but I'd like to maybe show this slide. I'd like to see if we can talk some more. These slides are out of... Well,
you haven't gotten that far along.
Not really. Part of the problem as I see it, I've thought of this through a lot, and I think it would, and I've debated on this, I think it would be not too hard to put together a kind of formula for people so they can see how to connect easier, and I think we'll have to do that. One of the problems being that if we want to take on the total property, that where people might want to begin may be a different place than where they might want to be 4 or 5 years, and how is that going to happen? Should they start in existing structures and then as the thing expands, pick the site that you want to be, long range and start to work on that? Or should we use temporary structures, initially, and then change those? Use those. There's a lot of things that could be done. And this is one. My guess would be that the ideal thing would be that if Kairos is successful in raising the money that it would need to I see Kairos, let's say, buy 20 acres in the main house and maybe it's one of the small houses around it or something, plus build 2 or 3 other buildings. That would be ideal, raise the money for that.
If you built these other structures, which you're talking about, couldn't these structures house temporarily instruction, for example, construction integration, and some kind of base for research, and a place where structural integration could go on in these structures while we were sitting around there deciding on a site or a place?
We have to do that somehow.
In other words, there would be a place from which an institute could come in and start to function.
Right.
And then
What's needed there, you see, of services are the services of someone who's sufficiently practical and sufficiently informed in terms of money and et cetera, et cetera. We sit around here talking and none of us understands what a dollar bill is, except it's something to mean it's in the pocket.
Right. Well, we've got a number of people that are pretty good at that. George is good. He's really a businessman. He does most of the time. Hand properties and bills. But if we're talking about that kind of an arrangement, which I think that's the way we have to begin, we'd be talking about some sort of a lease situation.
Well, I personally, if I were going to really exempt myself to build an institute there, I would not want to lease it. I'd want to own the property outright, so that in the case of the changing values of money that's going on in these days, you have something that changes with the changing value of money. Otherwise, you kidnap money and then you can't use that money.
Were you looking at the lease in terms of just while it was getting started before the...
Well, in terms of what you were saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In other words...
The other alternative would be, for example, let's say we in the first purchase we pick up 80 acres. If there's a piece of property in that 80 acres, whatever, 2, 3, 4, 5 acres, whatever it would be, that would appeal to you. Then the question would be to kind of carve that out and to come up with a price that would be the right kind of price. The people that get involved in the beginning are going to come in at a very different price than people that might come in later. But it's hard for me to say exactly what that's going to run because we don't know exactly what some of the engineering costs and development costs and so forth are. But my guess would be it would run somewhere between $2,500 and $5,000 an acre. No, maybe a week. 2 to 4.
Fascinating. And you see that Kairos might provide enough structures so that an institute could get going while it was building its structure.
For example, like Tom Munson, I know how he's going to start. He's going to start by building himself a home there and working out the Kairos, using the conference rooms and letting his people sleep there. And he'll start in a house, and then as the thing begins to build for him, then he'll go from that place. And I would suspect too his family would be the same.
But you see the Kairos aspect as buying the purchase and building these 3 or 4 extra buildings.
Well, what I see is that the Skill Setting Zinc would buy the property in the first purchase. And another thing too, that kind of stock, and anybody that wanted to invest in that can invest. I would encourage that kind of try to bring money in, do development stuff, put investment into that, which the stock would the more successful the project, the more valuable the stock would be. Kairos, then, let's say there's 80. Kairos, let's say, would buy 20 of that, 30 of that in the main house. And then there would be maybe 5 or 6 acres, or no more than that, maybe 10 acres that would probably be really ideal for homes. So there'd be 5 or 6 people that would probably cut those out for homes. And then the rest of the land could be available for people that wanted to start right off the bat with centers. The question is economics. Now, let's say if you wanted to start with, let's say, 2 acres, and it's going to cost $5,000. Then you might even want an option on some property that would sell. Then you're talking $5,000, which is not much money for land. But then the question is what kind of structure you want, how are you going to finance that? Now, there's a lot of ways to go. You probably have enough people that are connected with you that have money that would create maybe an underwriting group that would co-sign a note for you. So, yeah, you could do that. I know that when I was working at Cinnamon, they bought the whole smallest bit. They put 10 of their rich guys, and they got them together, and they all co-signed on a note, $100,000, $150,000, whatever, to a bank, and they got it done. And it's harder today, but if you've got the right people, that will guarantee it. It's possible. That's one way to do it. Another way is just to raise the money out of it. And to begin with, you wouldn't want to get in the business probably of housing people, so I suppose that could be done, either by Kairos or some other way they could worry about that themselves. So all you'd be concerned about would be the facility to do your work in, and do the research and the work. So it wouldn't be that expensive initially. And the design would have to be such that it could expand and grow. That's all part of working it out with an architect. But my guess would be that for somewhere between $25,000 and $50,000, you'd be off with the structure working, and you'd be ready to go. That's ballpark stuff.
We haven't had much luck with our mobile. It probably goes about stuff.
Another thing I found too is that, at least in the past, is that if I'm raising money, I want to do something, and if I have something that's concrete, tangible, that people really give money to it, and especially if the idea really has merit and it's exciting. And if you're raising money for brick and mortar too, that's another thing. Because a lot of times, people give money. You sell basically dedicatory rights, put a name or something on it. They give you a building, and that. You're selling mortality, that's what you're selling.
What kind of winter temperatures do they have down there?
Well,
Makes a difference in how much money you have to put into a house.
Yeah, that's true. Well, it rarely gets. I think we have a few days a year that it freezes, frost, in the early morning, and then it comes out. I would say that it ranges through the winter months somewhere during the day between 50 and 70. And the night drops to between 40 and 50. And you get those nights that get down around.
Similar to us.
Yeah.
It's nicer than most.
It's nicer than most.
The air is nicer.
There's no smog?
I would say that the hot and cold part of it is about the same. It doesn't get as hot as it does in the downtown LA area. It just doesn't get that warm.
Is there a window in that property?
Wind? Yeah. Yeah, in fact, it's about maybe 5 to 10 degrees cooler than it is about 3 or 4 miles over in Ramona, just because there's a breeze that comes over that hill. It's direct kind of from the ocean, it blows down through the valley. So it's good. It's not, doesn't keep us cool.
What's between you and the ocean? What kind of stuff?
Houses.
Delmar racetrack.
No, the track is over. They're between us now, where we are now, and the ocean. This one is. Yeah, in fact, they're beginning to develop tracks that back up against the mountains, you know, where we go up. But these houses, that's why the land is going to be very, very limited. And so they're mostly homes. You got some big developmental communities right over the hill. See, that's what happens. You drop down the hill, you hit Rancho Bernardo, and then you hit Rancho Penasquitos. And then you go across Kearney Mesa, and then you hit the home.
When you talk about autonomy, you don't mean architectural autonomy. You mean electricity, or you plan to have it all put underground?
That's what I mean by the price of them. Depends on where we are with the development. There's electricity that comes in the property. There's a 20-inch water main that runs down the middle of the property. So a lot of these costs would be minimal in comparison to having to bring that stuff in.
In other words, there would be a certain amount of money saved by the fact of having communal electricity.
Well, you have to do that.
What I'm saying is that there will be certain, you're going to build in some safeguards into the kinds of restrictions, good restrictions.
Yeah. That's why we have this corporation GSI, because it's got to be concerned about how it's going to be developed. We're in the situation of saying, well, we don't want a master plan like you would, or it's one of these Rancho Bernardo communities where they've got it all master plan, because that really defeats the whole thing. You've got to at least be able to plan at least your first initial phase, because you know what you want to do. And then from there, you can begin to use these guidelines. And I've developed 5 themes that kind of carry through. I think should carry all the way through the different phases of the community. And but we're not sure exactly how those themes are going to go and unfold. Now, with the architect, right off the bat, one of the things that we do is begin to have to decide where some of the main roads would be, and a whole philosophy about that. A lot of these areas we probably won't even allow any automobiles in at all. We just have to park and then either do a lot of walking or move around with something smaller, because you don't want to wreck a lot of cars. So that would be part of the plan. So you just only have a couple. You have to put in a couple kind of main roads, but if they're designed right, they can look right and you can't go too fast on them. So, and that has to be done. And then there's just, then we might make some general designations of what areas would be good for residences and what areas might be good for centers and what areas would be good for other kinds of things, recreational things and parks. So that there's a sense about that. But the land, it's a matter of being with the land. The land really tells you a lot about that. And those guidelines will be built in fairly soon, so the thing can't be wrecked. And then in terms of the kinds of structures that will go in, there's going to be some very strict guidelines. Not necessarily the kinds that you're used to in the past. Like you can have a house only so high and so, but it may be things like you can't move trees, rocks, and slope it down. So if you're going to be there, you're going to be with what's there.
Our horizontal pelvis. And you remember where we have hunted. We have hunted through the fascial planes, superficial fascial planes. That's where we started first. And oddly enough, we did get some response, remember? Now, some fine day, any one of you that hasn't got anything to do and has an artistic talent can go and get us pictures of that whole wrapping and sling that is the container for that body. And you know, I feel that if one had an adequate illustration of this, it would do a great deal to make the realization and the teaching of this and the acceptance of this clearer. But you see, we are dealing with a fascia which is so unknown that a teacher of physiology says there's never anything wrong with it. There's not much known. And you see, it's terra incognita, if we could get some reality. So I bid you are all going out into a fairly sophisticated world, and maybe you will meet somebody who would be able to take on this assignment. It would be of very, very great value. All right, enough. So we have our shopping bag of fascia. And this is an amusing metaphor, but it's really a very useful metaphor. Because it really is so. The good God didn't trust your common sense to keep your blocks stacked. He was very wise and knew his boys and girls. And so he put all those blocks into an elastic shopping bag so they wouldn't fall apart. Now, to the extent that they do fall apart, they put strain on the shopping bag, and you can see what's happening. But you see, to the extent that he takes these cubes and he puts them squarely into the bottom of the shopping bag, and you don't monkey whip them, you get a stable situation. We were talking last night, those of you that were here, about the Rolf quarrel with the Lowen concepts. And it is really right and exactly here. So you take and you literally force the second block in that shopping bag forward. And it has to topple off the bottom one. There's nothing else for it to do. It has to have the fourth lumbar tend to slide forward on the fifth lumbar. There's nothing else that can happen. Now, the only people who can resist that are people who are darn good physical specimens, and I don't mean athletes. I mean well-balanced, elastic bodies can do that and then come back to where they belong. But you're not going to meet those guys.
You're referring to some of the stress positions now.
You mean the Lowen?
Yes.
I'm referring to this business of putting them over a chair with their feet down one side and their head in the
That one.
That one. Don't you do it.
It's all tilting in the pelvis forward, right?
Yes, it tilts it exactly the wrong way. If you believe what you have seen in this room, you can only draw the conclusion that that tilts it the wrong way.
I've seen the difference in energy. That's enough.
Of course you have. So has everyone in this room. If they hadn't, they wouldn't be here. They'd be sitting at Lowen's feet. And this is all right with me.
I think the reason Lowen does it is so it'll look different than what right-hand people do with just regular breathing.
Well, I don't know why Lowen does it, but my idea about Lowen is that he doesn't understand physical bodies. I am not criticizing him as a psychotherapist, but I am saying that I do not feel that Lowen really understands physical bodies in a structural sense. And I don't care who repeats that to him as my opinion. And as I said before, every last one of you sitting in this room is evidence of the fact that this is what you believe. So, getting back to where we started, the shopping bag. So the first hour, if you like, is the hour of the shopping bag. And what you're really doing is kind of taking your shopping bag, which is stretched around these various blocks, cubical blocks in there, and you're sort of pulling it this way and you're pulling it that way, and it lets the conical blocks sit more squarely, each on each. Now, it says a great deal for, well, you name it, the vital force, God, life, what have you, that you can take very maltreated blocks and bring them back, release them from the strain, and have them come back and take hold. It's like that little fuchsia out there. Where is Owen? The fuchsia's growing. But there it is. This is the picture of life, you see. Give it half a chance and it's off again. So, there you have it. And you remember we called attention to the fact that in that first hour, What we were interested in solely was the releasing of the pressures which kept the pelvis from turning itself, organizing, squaring itself in the shopping bag. So one of the pressures would have been the pressure of the thorax. One of the pressures would have been the pressures of the legs. Many of you here have felt.
Dr. Biddle's on the phone.
I'm sorry. I don't see that anybody's going to straighten this because we got it messed up already. If we get our blocks sliding properly on each other and freed and in this shopping bag, so your shopping bag shows no strain, then from there on, the guy is on his own. Then he's got to get busy and he's got to put himself on his legs in such a way that he's not going to again displace the pelvis. And you see, this takes a while. But some of you saw here yesterday, Don? Yeah, it was Don. There was another one, where you had a whole wad of stuff suddenly becoming ordered under that pelvis, so that you could see how a pelvis should be working on a leg. You could see how that joint should be working through, how that joint was designed to work through. And you see, this thing is the object of the exercise. This is what you're doing the second hour. But you cannot get up to the pelvis the second hour. Because as long as the periphery is in trouble, you can't get the center organized. All logic to the contrary notwithstanding. And the reason you can't, I imagine, is inherent in the quality of the shopping bag, the laws which govern that elastic envelope. And so, in that second hour, you apparently have an entirely diverse picture. And you have a picture there of starts. I'm hammering on this because of the tendency of people to simply say, well, the second hour is an hour of the legs and the feet, and you start down there. This is one way to put it, but why do you do it? And I'm trying to get within you, all of you, so firmly implanted the whys and the wherefores in the background and the perspective of this thing, that you don't just go arbitrarily going into a second hour in terms of the feet. See, it isn't what you do, it's how you do it that counts. And so in that second hour, this is what you have to do. And once again, then you're going back and again shifting your blocks by virtue of dissolving the glue a little bit and letting them get back. And you see, this calls for a readjustment of the part of the spine that's going to readjust. It calls for a readjustment of actual vertebra on vertebra, particularly in the lumbar section, because the lumbar section is the one that bears weight. And then it calls for a readjustment in the cervical section, because the cervical section and the lumbar section necessarily interplay. Necessarily interplay. And if you're going to leave the cervical section where it was, it's going to drag on the lumbar section again. Now that makes your second hour. And the third hour, you go to the sides of that shopping bag, and you take a look at it, and you say, oh my goodness, this stuff got stuck, and it hasn't gotten unstuck. And you're going to have to unstick the elastic material so that it can take on a new position. And the new position is beginning to get you a deeper organization. It's going to take you out of the metaphor of the shopping bag and put you onto the recognition that you have a something which is a spontaneous, self-creating, vital something here. Who's wanted?
Yeah.
And it's no longer an accidental being knocked around, being an effect unit. You are now getting it to the place where it can begin to be a cause of its own well-being. And this is an interesting philosophical concept. And the reason it can be caused is by virtue of the actual energy reorganization or organization that's coming through. Where you have organization and where you have order, there is the opportunity for a creative cause. And so you see this comes in as you begin to let those large weight units start to relate to each other, the thorax to the pelvis, start to relate to each other in such a way that they are now becoming a unit within the gravitational field, not simply bits and pieces thrown together that happen to stick. And now this actually becomes a unitary situation, a unitary field within the gravitational field, I imagine. Peter's going to measure it for me sometime.
Just take an apple.
This is my apple dropping. Mr. Newton can have his apple. Anyway, I call your attention, Mr. Levine, to the fact that my apple isn't dropping. My apple is rising. And that's the difference between Mr. Newton and me.
And if you could measure that one, I take my hat off to you.
Well, you never know. I really think that before you people go on to another world, somebody will be able to so organize energy and so deal with energy that you can measure that one. I really think
so too.
But we don't have to wait for that day. We can use it right in this room this week and next week and the week after.
So Dick Tracy says that.
He's my authority.
He who controls gravity controls the universe.
Yeah. Maybe that my generation, or perhaps the one right behind me, will see structures without the necessity of supports into the ground.
Glad I'm not going to be around.
It's pretty exciting.
Confusing. I may know how to spell, but I wouldn't know how to be able to handle that one. Albuquerque. No one in the room knows how to spell Albuquerque, except Bradmore.
How do you
sorry
spell Albuquerque?
You go over there and find out. Anyway, we're now in that third hour. Yesterday, we noticed that in terms of those supports, which Don is going to dispense with someday, those supports were still very wobbly and very crooked and very disorderly with reference to the pelvis. This was perfectly apparent as we looked at the man, as you look at anybody coming in for a fourth hour. This fact is betrayed by the line down the medial aspect of the leg. You don't need to ask him what hour he's had. If those medial aspects look like all the medial aspects you saw yesterday, you simply start in giving him a fourth hour. And if they don't look like that, you don't give him a fourth hour, because you'll find that he's forgotten that he had a fourth hour from Dick Demerly in New York. He may tell you he needs a fourth hour, but if his legs don't look like that, don't believe him. Look further. And what you are doing still is the same old stuff. You are taking that thickened, mucky mass of stuff that immobilizes the pelvis into a certain position, which has been dictated by the way the kid has walked from the time he stood on his feet, and possibly by some other emotional considerations, like he liked to show off how he could sit in the lotus position, things like that. All of these will be determining how those legs fit into that pelvis. Now, having done all this, where have we gotten? And why are we doing it? We say we want to make the pelvis horizontal. Why do we want to make the pelvis horizontal? Right now, I want this answer in terms of physiology, not in terms of gravity, not exclusively in terms of gravity.
There's a lot of stuff that's resting on the floor. That pelvis, a lot of viscera, a lot of physiology.
Yeah, there's a lot of physiology, but they aren't viscera resting on the floor.
Well, supported
by virtue of the integrity of the floor.
And
now we have to define integrity as well as defining floor. What is the floor of the pelvis? And what is the integrity of that floor? And this is the crux of the whole situation. This is the key to the key. So, what is the floor of the pelvis? Come on, some of you physiologists.
It's the pubococcygeus, which is giving the support to the structures and allows the functioning to occur. If it's an organized pubococcygeus, which surrounds the rectum, surrounds the genital organs on the floor.
Pubococcygeus, certainly, it's not the only, it's not the sole and only area.
Levator,
That's the pubococcygeus.
So also you're dealing with
Up to date.
the autonomic nervous system, with the ganglion.
That's right. This is what I want to lead into. This is the thinking that I want to lead into. And basically the key of the pelvic floor is the pubococcygeus. Now, the pubococcygeus must needs, according to its name, run from the pubes to the coccyx. And it's down there like a sling to serve as the floor of the pelvis. But on its integrity depends what's going on in the pelvic organs and the abdominal organs. And Peter was off on a bad trip when he talks about their resting on the floor of the pelvis. When they rest on the floor of the pelvis, the guy crawls in here and begs you to do something for him. He's got such, quote, symptoms. That's where they mustn't rest. In fact, nothing must rest anywhere. Everything must be suspended somewhere. Now, this is going to be the difference in your thinking and the thinking that's going to overwhelm you on every side from these other well-meaning and, in their own opinion, well-informed people, because they know that gravity's always pulling everything down. Everything has to rest on something. It just ain't so. If you organize the field of force, it doesn't rest. It swims.
That's what I was talking about.
Oh, go on, you're too bright. Now, here's what happens when things rest. Can you come over here and see this? There, yeah, I'm sure you have. There is the line of the pubococcygeus. And when that pubococcygeus is not able to balance itself, and the stuff upstairs rests, it isn't supported, it comes down through. When the pubococcygeus is balanced, then you get the kind of balancing of forces, of physiological forces within that body, which enables this to happen, and it doesn't rest. Now, the story of how this has been developed in the medical concept is an interesting one. And it doesn't have a very long history. There was a man, he still is, though he's pretty elderly at this point, whose name is Kegel, and he works in Los Angeles. And he got concerned about the problem of incontinence in women, particularly after childbirth. And he started in trying to find out what it was and why it was. And the thing that threw him was the fact that in trying to do dissections on cadavers, he couldn't find any muscle which would control, as he could see it, the physiological function of the bladder. And I don't recall precisely the sequence with which he recognized the fact that there was a muscle there, but after death it was so fine and it was so precise that after death the thing just sort of disappeared to the point where you weren't getting the sections filling it up. And as I say, I don't recall exactly the sequence in which he came to this recognition, nor the sequence in which he came to the realization that apparently this problem had been recognized as far back as the days of the ancient Egyptians, and that the ancient Egyptians not only had a word for it, they had a cure for it. And they sat women on chaises percées, and they had hot stones, they had previously heated stones, which they had under there, and then they took herbal infusions, and they spurted them onto the hot stones, and when the liquid hit the hot stones, it spattered upward to the bottom of the gal, who then did various things like this to escape from it, and in so doing strengthened the muscle. The Egyptians knew something about it too. And he found this in one of the papyri over in the British Museum. I guess the Evers. Say, did we ever get that book, Lee? You remember we've been writing for books all summer, and I haven't seen one of them come in.
Gutenberg is on vacation.
Well, Gutenberg is finished, I can see. At any rate, there is a book which we have ordered here, talking about some of the old systems of medicine, and they don't talk about this particular aspect of it, but they do give quite an abstract of the Ebers Papyrus. It's worth looking at. But thereby, you see, this man got the clue to the fact that he had to find out some sort of a system to get these gals to work on that muscle. And so he did something simpler than hot stones and herbal mixtures. He just told them to sit on the toilet and constrict the muscle to the place where it stopped the flow of the urine. And sometimes this took them a while to do. And having done it this way, where they had the outward visible evidence of it, he could tell them to get busy and do this thing 3,000 times a day, and as they were going about their business. And this business worked, and he was building up a muscle. And the business worked, and it worked as a cure for incontinence, but it also began to show up all kinds of other functional improvements. Functional improvements in sexual activity and sexual adequacy, and so forth and so on. A general improvement of the health. Why? Because this was no longer coming down through the bottom, but was coming up where it belonged. Now, it is interesting to really go to some of these pictures and look at the actual. This, of course, is very schematic. But go to your own books, which are less schematic, and see what constitutes the floor of the pelvis.